Hey everyone, we are so excited to bring you this episode where we get to chat with Black Sails co-creator Jon Steinberg. We had a few internet problems, so we had to end the conversation when we lost connection with Jon. But the good news is that he has said he'll come back to chat with us after season 4. So we'll save our last few questions for him for then. I'm sure we'll have so many new questions. But for now, enjoy this episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fathoms Deep, a Black Sails podcast from Common Room Radio. I'm Liz Stevens.
And I'm Daphne Olive. And we have a very special guest here, someone we've been waiting a really long time to talk to. We have Jon Steinberg with us.
Hi, everybody.
You're the man behind the curtain. You're the Wizard of Oz himself.
One of them. Yes, it's awfully crowded on this show. It's awfully crowded behind the curtain, but yes.
We're happy to give everyone a tiny peek right now behind the curtain and ask you lots of questions.
Let's do it.
All right. I just wanted to note that Luke Arnold said in his interview, I wouldn't dare to try to poke into the mind of Jon Steinberg. So we're going to do just that right
advice. Now. Yeah.
Well, we dare. We are intrepid sailors, sir.
I would think that would probably go for pretty much anyone, but...
Well, I want to say really quick before we get started, and I know that Daphne's got questions that she's ready to fire away at you, but I want to say that I feel so respected as an audience member in the way that you've told this story, because you have done it with subtlety and with elegance and on your own time frame. And I really have respected that. I think that you laid out the story in the way that you wanted to tell it, and you kind of didn't give two shits what most networks would have said or done to make it more palatable for the audience and one bite at a time. And I've just enjoyed every second of it. It's been beautiful.
Thank you very much. That's actually a really nice thing to hear, because it's I think that for me, I know, and for Robert coming into it sensibility wise, I think wanting to write something that we would want to watch and not feel like it was being chewed up and sort of fed to us was important. We gave a little bit of a shit about what the network thought. Maybe not two of them, but some. I think, it's, I think for me, just as a process issue, balancing that was a learning experience over the first and second season, of knowing when you can say no and knowing when to. It's very easy to say, trust your gut and say no and do what you want. And that's not always the best advice. Sometimes they're right and they don't appear to be at first glance. And then you scratch the surface a little bit and you realize that they're responding to something that is real and you need to listen to it. Sometimes they're just right. Sometimes they're wrong. And then you get into a situation where the politics of the job come into play. But so it's definitely a bit of a tightrope to figure out how to make a show do both of the things that I hope we're doing, which is it's paced like a novel in some ways.
Yes.
The character development is hopefully paced in that way where we want to make moments of all of these things and have the emotional fireworks be important. But it's also got to do the thing that I think this is where the shits we gave, I guess, comes into play. It's got to do the thing the network wants. Like, it needs to be a great big naval action show, which, setting aside the production realities, is also, as a pacing issue, not always the easiest thing to graft onto or to marry into a novel about people's, their identity crises and what it's like to live outside civilization. So it's always been a puzzle. I think it got harder as we went further because, weirdly, I think the better at it we got, the harder it got. Because you start eliminating things. You can't do that again. You've done it already. We did this, but it wasn't quite right. And how do we make it better? And so that was a very long-winded way of saying thank you. It's a nice thing to hear that it's coming across the right way.
No, I loved it. That was wonderful. Well, and I am one of those audience members that did speak to. I know that you had talked once in the writers panel about how the network had said that you needed just a little more Pirates of the Caribbean and a little less Deadwood, I think is what they said. And that was probably one of the things that kept me in it was just that there were moments when we were allowed to have fun, and that was important to me. Yeah. And of course, I'm the tall ships girl, so to see the ships really having those.
I mean, for somebody to spend, the show actually doesn't cost what you might think it does. It's not. There are a lot of shows that spend a lot more money than we do, but it's not an insignificant amount of money. It's on the upper end of things, and I think for somebody to give you that money, they're not giving it to you to, so you can make your independent student movie. Like, they're giving it to you so that you can make this thing that's going to be big and is going to, cut a trailer and is going to move. And so, yeah, I mean, I think, and then you get into the production reality of it. It's like, all right, well, how the fuck do you do that? Like, how do you make something that big that features don't really mess with even? I mean, I don't. I mean, Master and Commander sort of is the gold standard, but it's like, that was 15 years ago. And there hasn't really been much since in that space, and it's for good reason.
Tell me about it. I know.
Liz is painfully aware of that. Oh, poor Liz. It's hard to be someone who loves tall ships that much.
And lives in Oklahoma, which is like the most landlocked that you can be as someone who lives in the world on planet Earth. Yes.
It's yes, exactly. So hopefully we got you your fix, and it'll last you for a little while. So
I think so. Thank you very much. I've been well taken care of.
Exactly.
Well, and my favorite thing about it is that you all have, I mean, you basically sold me as a person who loves that stuff. I think for me, the thing that, part of what sold me in the beginning is the political intrigue, because that's what gets me excited, is all the politics. But yeah, I mean, by the end of season 3, I'm right there with Liz. I just get so excited about.
If you can't have fun with it, then what are you doing with it? I mean, it's like it's that's part of the challenge. I think is also that it needs to do those things. It needs to have those moments where you get excited and where it's okay to. Get excited for them, for these people you've invested in, and just for it to be fun. I mean, I think I don't know. It's what I would respond to as an audience member. And at the end of the day, I think there's no responsible way to do this unless you're really just kind of doing it for yourself. I think you have to be brutal about you're separating yourself as a storyteller and separating yourself as audience member, and then try to be really hard on the storyteller part of you. But I think there's some truth to that. I think that I like watching this show, and I think as long as that's true, hopefully there's something that's working about it. So
we obviously like watching it, but also but also, I mean, what I've said many times in the podcast and what I love is that when you all do have lots of fun. I mean, certainly there are parts of the show that are dark and less fun. I mean, except if you're me, because I seem to love that stuff very much, more than the average person. But even when you are doing the stuff that could be seen just as fun, there's always, the reality of the characters and the relationships are always progressing during that as well.
Sure.
And that's I would get really bored, because that's just who I am. I would get really bored if it was just like about action, and no matter how cool the ships things that you're doing are, if there wasn't actually happening hand in hand with character development, I would have gotten bored a long time ago, and I'm obviously not even remotely bored.
I think I mean this sincerely. I think I would have too. I think it's obviously easier to tell a story in which protagonist and antagonist are very clearly defined, and in which people will, in which you will allow people to act in ways that are shitty and will just make you angry and sort of make that fire in your head and in your gut and make you just kind of hate them. Like it's easier, but it's just not as good. And so I think we've put a lot of effort, time, just emotional energy into trying to constantly be applying the bullshit test to everyone's decisions, to every line of dialogue, to every scene, to make sure that when you look at it this way, front to back, it may make sense, but then when you turn it around, it's got to make sense again. It's got to make sense from the other character's point of view. And I think the sort of the fortunate situation we were put in by our production schedule and by Stars is that I had time to do that. I had time to sit with story in a way that in TV you really don't get to very much. You know, I've done this where, you know, a script is getting turned over every week and a half. And there's just no way, or at least not, I can't do that. I couldn't do that and do this level of complexity. But because we had the time, we were really able to, you know, I don't think it was their favorite thing in the world at Stars or at production, you know, that, you know, the scripts took longer, but I think, we caught a relatively, low level of aggravation for it from them, because when they eventually read stuff, they got it and they saw that, oh, we like this and this is cool. And if this is as long as it takes, then I guess this is what it is.
Mm-hmm. About how long did it take to write a script?
It depends on the script. The first episodes took, it depends, I guess, how you define it. So we would open the writer's room in June-ish, which is slightly misleading because I'd still be in post on the season before. So if I was lucky, I was maybe half days in the room. I didn't start worrying about the first episode for about a month. So that was just no bad ideas, large scale structure, you know, trying to get a sense for what the movie's about and what it's about in sort of 4 or 5 different directions that all needed to line up of, you know, what's Flint's story? Why do I care? What's Silver's story? Why do I care? And how is this going to be big and not just be, bullshit action for the sake of it? Like, how do we make it conceptual? That would go on for a month or two. Which, to give you a sense of scale in broadcast, which is a little bit apples and oranges, but when you start your writer's room, you're about 6 weeks away from production. So it's a luxury to be able to spend 4, 6, 8 weeks before, usually about 4, 6 weeks before I would pitch to Stars, and I would pitch them kind of an overview of the season. This is sort of the story we want to tell. And from there, the first script usually took longer, a month or so. And then the way I would schedule it for myself was I would make sure I was, I would basically, I would say it broke down to about 3 weeks of script, but I would finish the finale right as prep was starting for the finale. So for the first episode, I was writing a script that, you know, that was way ahead. And then I would get even further ahead because we'd shut down in December for hiatus. And then through the course of January to April, production would catch up to me until they were kind of right on my tail, and then I would turn over the finale script. But it just got I wouldn't do it if I didn't think the scripts were getting better. You know, I think you can certainly waste time, you know, futzing with things, but there are a lot of things, I think, and I think just from hearing, you know, the way people are responding to the show, things I know broke at the last minute, you know, that wouldn't have been that way. Like that, the 310, the finale, we had no idea what that was. I mean, we knew it was this massive battle. And
really?
I had this fear all the way through the third. I had a very sort of a deep fear through season 3 that it wasn't going to be as emotional as season 2, and I think that was scary and sort of forced me to really dig in, especially in the second half of the season. But then when we knew this finale was about this battle, and then we started to realize the closer you get to it, you have this kind of creeping feeling of the 2 guys I care about aren't going to be in the same place. And what am I going to do about that? Like, I don't really care. At the end of the day, I want to watch things explode, but I don't know that I care. I care what I care what the sort of the climax of this relationship is. And so it was very, I don't know, this may be a little bit too behind the curtain, but it was very last minute where it was like, oh, we have to get out of time. And figure out a structure that allows us to sort of tell the story we want to tell, with the story we are beholden to tell, and how to fit that puzzle together. And even while we were doing it, I like very candidly was not sure it was going to work.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. It was incredibly ambitious, but the structure of 310 was extraordinary. It was absolutely magnificent.
A weird one. It's a flash forward where
it's a weird one, he says humbly.
Yeah. wait, John, I think you heard me say this. Maybe you listened. Like, it is my favorite hour of television.
Well, thank you very much. I feel like these things have a weird way of evolving, and sometimes they will evolve forward, and then when you look back, it's very hard to, like, if I had to describe what that structure is, it would sound bananas. a flash forward into someone predicting a thing that's going to happen that it doesn't really make a lot of sense. My favorite stuff with that, the first and second season, I think a little bit more the second season of West Wing, did a lot of that, where the structures are bananas. They're just all over the place, but they work emotionally. All the points that kind of need to get hit.
Right.
And so it's hard to do, and it is scary, because if you miss, you're fucked. You've got a story that just won't cut together, and there's no plan B, and that's it. But I also kind of feel like our commitment to ourselves, I think at the beginning of this, is we're not going to be afraid to try stuff. And sometimes that stuff didn't work as well as we wanted to. And sometimes the stuff that didn't work was really helpful, in terms of figuring out, like, okay, that didn't work, but I kind of see why. And now I get it. Like, I get how this machine is functioning, in a better way. So I think when you're given the freedom to make mistakes like that, you end up with better product in the aggregate, in the long run.
Wow.
I wrote a book last year, and it was the first book I ever wrote, first thing I ever wrote. And I had... And
it's gorgeous.
Oh, that's great.
Thank you, Daphne. But it had 2 points of view, 2 timelines, 3 POVs, 2 timelines. It could have been completely fucked up, is basically what I'm saying. Right. It could have not worked at all. But yeah, I'm really glad that I shot for it and tried to make it work, because you have to write the story that you want to read, and someone's got to write it.
Yeah, exactly.
Somebody's got to write it for me, because I'm not a writer.
And I think you're always telling 2 or 3 different stories if you're doing it properly. And I think my feeling is the emotional one needs to govern. And so sometimes the other stuff will get weird and start to take on strange shapes in order to make space for the emotional math to kind of line up properly. When it's structure for structure's sake, that's when I find myself looking at my phone a lot. And when I'm watching things that are and just kind of not really caring.
Right.
But yeah, it's difficult, and the math gets more complicated. And I think in both, at the end of season 2 and at the end of season 3, and frankly at the end of season 4, I felt it. Like, I felt the pile up of the math that we had sort of married ourselves to, and the complexity of it, and needing to stick a landing, that only got more complicated every step we took.
Oh no.
Season 3, I distinctly remember Robert and I in the office, like on a weekend, when we only had like 8 days left to write the script, and having this moment where I think I said out loud, this is the most complicated story we've ever broken. And he and I have broken a lot of stories together. And it was just a weird one. It was just and I think a lot of it, frankly, is because those guys are great, and you'd sit and watch them just, read the phone book to each other, and that gets you out a lot of the problems. So.
Right.
Well, they are great, but that phone book was a really good phone book, I've got to say.
Well, hopefully it was better than the phone book, at least. If that's the bar, then hopefully we can have it right.
Right. Tiny bit better than the phone book. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like, that conversation, like, we discussed it. Liz and I kind of didn't agree 100% about it. And then Luke had a totally different perspective on their conversation. And Lauren also, you haven't heard Lauren, but she also had a different perspective on it, and they all work.
Well, that's the other thing. They kind of have to. Like, there is story structure in season 4 that I think is massively dependent on this, but there are times where I become very acutely aware that there are 2 stories and both need to work, which is not to say that I don't think one of them is the thing that's happening, but it isn't elegant if they don't both work. It doesn't feel right if it feels like I'm forcing you into an interpretation. That is affirmatively a thing that I think I would tell other writers, you're wasting your time. That, at a certain point in TV, you just kind of have to go with stuff that works. But I don't know. We sort of jumped into this with both feet, and then 2 seasons and 3 seasons, and we can't get out of it now. So it's the 4th season, I think,
we're okay with that.
The 4th season is emotionally more complicated than the other ones, at least in terms of what it took to
emotionally more complicated. Yes. That's incredible.
It feels to me like it kind of has to, because we have, you have to get these people, at least the Treasure Island people, you need to get them at least in a direction, which I feel like they're pointing in that direction vaguely now, but you have to get them down that road.
There was a lot of
trying not too much to think about what you're going to do to all of them.
Well, that was the other thing. It's like, if this wasn't all complicated enough, just reading it forward, there's this thing staring you down at the end of it, which is not all endings are acceptable. There are endings that if you read them forward, having watched the first 3 seasons, they would be great and you would love it and it would be a good story. And they're just kind of factored out. They're not allowed because somehow it needs to at least suggest the book if it doesn't directly connect to it.
Right.
So that got complicated. But I think where it landed was in a place where it is what we set out to do, which I think when you read the book, it's a different book. And the motivations, people's motivations are a little bit different than what you might have thought when you read it the first time. It is also, I think and the significance of the book itself, I think, is different from what you would have read. I think came to pretty early. So I would feel comfortable saying it was baked into the process, that the book kind of strangely isn't canon for us any more than the historical record is canon for us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, sure.
It is a fictional children's story about a historical record that we are writing. This is, I guess, essentially the cleanest way to describe it. So if Flint and Silver and Billy and all these people were a part of history, we interpret Treasure Island to be the sort of romanticized that they've taken liberties with the record that we're creating.
Their legend. Sure.
No, but that makes a lot of sense because that's essentially what he was doing with the whole pirate, mystique and all of that. Yeah. That is essentially what Stevenson was doing, no?
Yeah, and I think he also had the benefit of, he was writing a book for his kids. It was a genre that didn't exist, and he could kind of do whatever he wanted. And so there are definitely moments in the room where, and I say this with absolute, fully aware that this book is going to be around a long time after anybody remembers that this show ever was on the air, but where you look at it and it's like, that makes no sense. I'm sorry, it just makes no sense. And I'm sure it made sense to him, but it's just weird. But you know what? There have definitely been times where I've had that reaction, and then you poke at it, and then it weirdly finds a way to snap into place with a thing we were trying to do that we just didn't know how to do yet. And it's like, oh, that's actually kind of cool. Mm-hmm. I imagine he didn't know that's why he was doing it, or that it was going to fit with us, but it helped. I think the fact that it's a weirdly ornate story. Everyone's motivations are weird, and the its own historical record that it's referring to is weird. Flint. This is now just within the 4 walls of that book. Flint buries this treasure. They all see him do it, but then they leave with him. Period. New thought. Somehow he ends up in Savannah, drunk, alone, and dies there with Billy and the rest of the crew. And it's like, so when I'm saying we had to marry it to a book that didn't want it there, it's like, that's the sort of the puzzle shape that had to get fit at the end of it, which is weird.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think when it got to the moment of feeling like, do we want to do more? Do we want to do season 5? Because I think that door was opened for us by the network. The fact that we figured out a way to fill that shape, and it felt right. It's like, I'm not doing that again. I don't think I could do it again. I think we sort of found the ending.
Yeah.
Let's declare victory and depart the field. So
I can't tell you how much I respect that decision too. I mean, as much as I love the show and would like for it to go on for forever, sure. But yeah, tell the story, and when it's done, close the book and let it be this perfect thing.
It felt vaguely, we put the time into it. We definitely spent a lot of time, and maybe this is stuff we can talk about after season 4 airs, but we broke a couple of versions of season 5. And there was a version or two where it was like, I'd watch that. I'd have fun writing that. But it felt like epilogue. It felt like the story had been told.
Oh, yeah.
And I think what made me feel better about it was this is happening now. It's happening all over the place. I think it's becoming creatively and commercially acceptable to tell a story that ends. Where every show doesn't be 12 seasons of filler. And so then it was like, okay, everybody else is doing this, then it's fine. I don't feel like we're that dumb for canceling our own show.
I'm happy. I'm happy that trend happened and it gave you all the space to make that decision. I mean, as sad as I am personally that this will be the last year of it, just because it's been so much fun for me. I would much rather my favorite show be ending the way it should be ending and be done.
Yeah, it weirdly was never, I mean, it was never going to do that. It was never really a show. It's one story, and it's like you can't just keep writing chapters on the end of the novel because they're paying you to. So,
no, absolutely not.
So yeah, I feel good about that.
Right, and it has a beautiful shape. I mean, for us, there's like 1/4 of that shape is still to be known, but I feel like that it has, up until now, it's suggesting the beautiful shape that the whole thing will be, and that's an amazing thing. I mean, it's just an amazing thing for it to be like you said, that it's like a novel, like it starts where it starts and it ends where it ends, and that's the story you're telling.
Yeah.
And that's what it's about.
Yeah, and I think that actually makes it adds to, not to belabor it, but it adds to the complexity of storytelling, in the sense that you don't have these outs of just, we'll just go off and tell this story, or we'll add this other piece to it. It's like if it doesn't come from where you've been, you can't do it. And it's just the decision tree just starts to get narrower and narrower as you get deeper into the story.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting way to, I think it's relatively new. I didn't watch TV like this, before 5 or 10 years ago.
No, none of us did.
You've essentially seen 90 minutes of a movie and then you have to wait another year to watch the last half hour. Like, it's a weird way to consume a story.
It is.
But it's cool.
Yeah.
It's Dickens, it's like, it's old school serial, and not X-Files serial. I love that show, but not X-Files serial in the sense of like, we're going to give you a little bit at a time, but at the end of the day, it's not really what it's about.
We don't need to go down the X-Files conversation road.
I mean, just old original X-Files even. Like, it was serialized, but kind of not really. And we never wanted it to just be a soap opera either, where we could just start moving people around. Like, it just didn't interest me. So,
yep. No.
Now, that being said, were there particular darlings that you had to kill that you can tell us about, or were you able to pretty much do everything that you wanted to do with this story?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think two of them are obvious. I mean, I think I fought for months. Literally, I fought telling the story about Miranda dying. Didn't want to do it. Just hated the idea of it.
Wow.
And love the leads.
I'm glad to hear that was hard for you too.
I just kind of categorically rejected it as a story, and so we spent a lot of time in the room trying to figure out another way around it. And you just get to a point where you look at it and it's like, I can't honestly, with a straight face, say that there's another version of the story that's more compelling. And the same thing happened with Vane. It was not, I think, something we went into the season feeling like we wanted to do. And I think, we were talking a little bit before about how the cast has really become a family. And I think you owe it to them to have these sort of second and third and fourth checks in place to make sure that if you're going to do this, that it's there's no better way around it. But it sucks. I mean, you spend all this time with these people and you really sort of come to like them and respect them and just love being around them. And then to have to write a script where they have to go away, and it's not fun. But so there was a lot of that. And there's also stuff, in every season, yes, constantly, there are, I throw away a ton of other people's story, but I try to be, I try to be very, tougher on my own stuff than I am with other people's, in the sense that when you hear something and you hear somebody getting animated about something that you disagree with, and then you spend 2 seconds thinking about, like, let's just for a minute pretend that they're right. Like, what would that feel like? It happens a lot, where you think about it and it's like, Jesus, like, I'm going to feel like an idiot because I've spent 3 weeks telling everyone we can't do this, but I think whoever this is might be right, and we kind of have to entertain this. Yeah, all the time. And you know what? There's a weird feeling of, it's weirdly relieving, a moment in which you realize you're wrong about it, because at the very least you understand that the story just got better. And so aside from the ego, which you kind of have to put away, and aside from, whatever politics are in play, there is a moment of like, all right, this feels weird, but there's a better story. Like, it's just better. And at the end of the day, no one's going to remember that I argued against it for 2 months before I finally said, okay, I get it. So yeah.
No, of course. The most important thing is what comes out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause I mean, it's, I like watching this show, but I think I hate the feeling of watching stuff that doesn't work more. And so it's really upsetting to have to sit in the editing bay and then, and sit in sound mix and watch stuff where you just feel like this isn't good. It's just not working. And so you just become, you just can't allow it. And so it's like, whatever it takes, I don't care. It's like how embarrassing it is, or however many people are going to tell you, I told you so. You just kind of need to do it.
Yeah.
All right, maybe we'll move. I wanted to ask some specific questions.
Yeah.
We have found it so fascinating, the choices you all have made about romantic, or I don't even know what to call, Rackham and Bonnie, because there was one time where I said something like that they had something that that transcended a romantic relationship. I mean, I just think you all have made such interesting choices, and not just that Flint is gay. I mean, that was a really interesting choice. I love that choice. I love the way you all did that choice. I think I read an interview with Toby Stevens where that was something you all told him from the very beginning.
Oh, yeah, I told him. I told him before he took the job. I knew that was the story we were telling before we delivered the first script. I mean, it was, and it wasn't for any other reason than sometimes you stumble into answers to complicated questions early, and you just kind of stick into it. And I think in this one, it was, how do you make the thing that he resents about England, the offense that sort of gave rise to it, so personal that he can't separate himself from it, that he can't ever figure out a way to not take it personally, I guess.
Right.
And so there was just this moment of that thing of like the most intimate, sort of woven into your identity and sense of yourself thing. What if somebody messed with that? And so we actually wanted to reveal it in season 1, and it was a moment where the network, for good reasons, said no.
Oh, wow.
And
I that's a moment where I'm happy with the network's choice. Like, I love that it took so long.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, to be candid, how much of that was, we're not sure we're comfortable with it, how much of it was...
Right, sure. Yeah, it could be for the wrong reason, the right thing for the wrong reasons. Don't we talk about that a lot in the show with the characters?
I will give them credit, though. Their articulation of it, and Chris Albrecht's articulation of it, was, I don't care yet. And he was right. The only way we could have done it in season 1 was in a massive dump of dialogue of somebody telling a story. Which ordinarily I'm not afraid of. I feel like if somebody's telling an interesting story, I'll listen. But
sure.
But in this case, it was like, okay, you know what? If we don't do it here, if we don't play that card of, you know what, the hell with it, we're doing it over your objection, we could have a whole story. We could meet this guy. We could, we could understand what this relationship is. And so it was a thing we knew we were going to do from the beginning, but how it happened developed. In terms of Rackham and Bonnie, I think that was another thing that I assumed for a long time could never go away. That they were essentially, that they were married, and and all, I don't know legally, but they were functionally married.
Right.
And then the story happened in season 2 with Bonnie. That I think, like, with a gun to my head of things that I'm proud of with the show, is probably at the top of the story of this woman sort of. Coming out and understanding that she's gay, especially given the life she's led. That was something we had to fight for. I think it was something that people were really weirded out by. Like, wait a minute, she kicks ass and she's awesome. Why is she in a dress? And so when we got to a point where I was like, I think she's gay. Like, I don't think this is something we want to be wishy-washy about. It required getting over that hump with Rackham of like, well, what am I going to do with this relationship? I don't want to split them up. Right. And then it became something way more interesting. It became, I think, what they probably...
Way more interesting.
Yeah, they're twins, essentially. I mean, I think they are, in the mythological sense, they are the twins in the story who are essentially two halves of the same person. And so I've never,
which is not unlike being married.
yeah, kind of. It's
I mean, it's amazing because it's not one thing or the other thing. It ends up being a little bit of both of those
and
things.
it's not defined really. You know, it's not categorical. There's no moment in which you know, that label, I think, is load bearing in any way. But it just became more interesting. It was like, and now they seem much more what they were to begin with some of the crap stripped away from it, which is just and I don't think it's codependency. I think it really is sort of, it's one of those stories about, you know, it's all over mythology. These two people that are, you know, are mirror images of each other and sort of fill each other out. And then it weirdly, I think, freed Rackham to do more of the stuff I liked doing with him anyway, which is he could be crankier and his relationship with her got more fun. And sometimes when you make a decision like that, you don't, because it feels true, the unintended benefits are massive. Like, it's just when a story is true, it will do things for you down the road. And this was one of them where it was like, oh, you remove that thing of them needing to be monogamous, and now they're just so much more fun to be around.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think, you know, some of them were accidents that developed along the way in terms of the relationship. Some of them were, you know, were built in from the beginning. And I think now that we know what the end of what season 4 is, the big one, the Flint Silver one, I think landed.
Well, you do at least.
Yeah, exactly. It is very strangely, considering the massive chalkboard full of math of things that we've sort of done between here and there. It's almost exactly what I thought it was going to be at the beginning. Not in the way I thought it was going to be, but the feeling of it, the kind of just the underlying emotional payoff was pretty much what I thought it was going to be. That was where it got to the point where I was like, I can't that again. I can't in 6 or 8 hours replicate that. There's a lot of accidents that went into it, and I think in building this, it's all relationships. You know, I think you can't tell a person's story. You tell stories about how people interact with each other, and frequently when they're not working, it's because of that. It's because you're focused on one person and you need two, or because you're focused on two people and they're missing the third end of the triangle. And so I think that is a muscle that I think has gotten stronger for me in the last 3 years of trying to figure out why stories are working or not working.
Yeah. Yeah, I've never seen more compelling character work done, frankly, and the relationships too. So, yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you. I also wanted to bring up something about, just while you were talking, it made me think, like in our season 3 wrap, about the fact that Flint that his backstory ended up being in the second season, was that Liz was telling the story of introducing a friend to Black Sails who did not connect with Flint. And she said, basically, if you can't connect with Flint in the season finale of season 1, like basically if you don't connect with Flint when he's killing Gates, you're never going to. Right. And I feel like on some level, we did need to go down. Like it is, I think we both said that for us, like the moment that we had most empathy in season 1 for Flint is the moment that he's killing Gates. And
that's
so
exactly right.
I do kind of love that we get the backstory starting after that. Like that we went through this thing where we were like, again, I loved Flint from the very first minute. Not everyone does, although I think most people do fall in love with him before the end of season 1. But that moment is such an important moment for, I don't know, I'm not sure how to put it exactly. Like this was in my list of questions, but I didn't know how to frame it exactly. Like I feel like you all put us through such fascinating kind of emotional acrobatics that you all have taken us places in this story where, and Liz and I have in the podcast had moments where we say this specifically, like you've taken us places where if you told us we were going to be there, like if you said this is going to happen and this is how you're going to feel about it, we would not have believed you.
Yeah.
And then we get to that place and we feel these emotions that are so interesting because they're not what we would have expected of ourselves, but they're so true. Yeah. And so I think for me, part of my love of Black Sails has been that process of going through watching myself. I mean, I feel like I've learned a lot about myself from the process of going through the emotional journey and ending up in places. Like we talked about that a lot in season 3 when they were in the cage and we realized that we were rooting for Flint to not capitulate and that all we had ever wanted was for him to all we had ever wanted for him was for him to take the road that James McGraw had once wanted, and then suddenly we're like, no, don't do that, we want you to rebel. But there are all these moments, and killing Gates was the first moment like that where you're like, wait a minute, I'm not supposed to be sympathizing with this person when he's doing this horrible thing, and yet I am. And what an interesting experience to experience the emotions I'm experiencing right now. So I feel like it's kind of perfect for us to go through that process with Flint in season 1 when he's doing the most horrible thing that he has done.
Right.
You love him the most. You empathize with him the most. And then, well, I guess I didn't watch season 1 in real time. So then for other people, they had to wait a year. But for me, I immediately went into his backstory. And then I already loved him so much. So to start with his backstory, like I was there. I wanted to know everything about him. I was so ready to feel for him and experience this with him. And so I think if you had done it earlier, for me, it would have actually been less powerful.
It wouldn't work. It wouldn't work for a lot of reasons. I think what you just said, I think is a really good one among them. I think, what Chris Albrecht's thing was of like, I need to see it, I think is real. I think, and we certainly didn't have the real estate or the oxygen, I guess, for a kind of flashback construction in season 1. I think some of it was, the learning curve in season 1 for me was very steep in almost every direction of how to manage the show, how to manage the story, how to manage all of it. I am glad I didn't try. I think the story that season 2 was able to achieve, I don't think I would have been able to do it in season 1. And so, I mean, I think I think if we had built season 1 to do that, maybe, but this is a weird structure. It's a weird, the show itself, I think, is a weird thing. And it took me a little while to figure out how to do, of really committing to this. It's a 560-page screenplay every season. But every 50 pages, it needs to acknowledge a beginning and an ending. And you got to do it in 6 months, and you got to do it. I mean, it's like features don't get asked to do this. Like, it's just not. It's not the same kind of a thing. And so, it was around season 2 where I think I changed the way we made the show. I changed the way I made the show and the way I thought about it. And I think that lent itself to a much more complicated story structure in season 2, but one that I think paid off and paid off in a better way than just telling you this is a guy you used to love and he's really mad about it. So,
Yes, you didn't just tell us. We definitely felt that along with him. Okay, so let's talk about backstory.
Okay.
I feel like we in the podcast had a bit of a change of our view about backstories. Not a change of our view, but backstories, totally fun. You heard Luke did tell us very vaguely that our dreams will come true, perhaps.
Yes, I was very proud of him. For how he praised it. It was very well executed.
I know. I loved how he said it, because I felt like it was like the perfect Black Sails thing. Like, you're going to get the thing that you want, but it may not end up being the thing that you want the way you think it is.
That's about right.
Which just seems like the most like that's what all the characters go through. So we might as well go through that with them too.
Yeah, exactly.
So on the one side, every backstory, starting with Flint's, I guess we started with Vane's backstory, but every backstory has been really an amazing experience for us. Like, we understand people and stuff, but then we kind of ended up going in the direction of thinking that perhaps the backstories end up explaining the characters, but also eliminating what's holding them back from kind of becoming the people that they need to become. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I mean, definitely Flint. Like, that's, I think, very clear. Although I'm not sure who Flint was supposed to become. We know who he's started to become, or who he became in season 3. I don't know if that's the person we wanted him to be.
Right. Well, I think Flint is the special case with the backstories, in the sense that we devoted an unusual amount of screen time to being able to play it through. And so it took on a whole host of other responsibilities, I think, narratively than the other ones did. Mm-hmm. It needed to power a season and kind of relaunch and power the rest of the franchise. The rest of them, I think in one sense, I think you're painting a portrait. I think you want to have a thing that is encapsulated and it takes place in one space, but it somehow defines someone in an elegant way. And so, Max's and Max's particularly and Bonnie's, mm-hmm. It's just you're trying to sort of like create a little narrative that somehow functions as a portrait. But there's agenda in it too. I think, in both mm-hmm. of those cases, yes, it's defining them, but there are real immediate reasons for them telling those stories. I think in Max's case, when she describes her childhood, it's genuine, but it's also the thing you say in a breakup where you're like, don't blame me. Like I've got I've got shit going on here.
Oh, Jon, you're taking one of my favorite scenes.
No, but I think that's real. I mean, I don't think there's a moment of artifice to it. I think it's just a way of saying.
No.
So a much more generous way of saying that is, I'm going to show you a vulnerability mm-hmm. that I have not shown anyone else, so that you will understand that I'm being honest with you.
Yes.
And so it's very specific. It that scene doesn't work without it. And I think in a way that I think is complementary, Bonnie's is the same. Is a little bit of mm-hmm. I understand that you are protecting me, but I need you to understand just how broken I am. And that I'm willing to show that to you suggests that I am broken beyond any ability to cope. Mm-hmm. I think those were important, and I think they always kind of have to be doing that. I think if you're just providing exposition for the sake of it, it's a waste of time, and it's probably not going to end up in the cut. Because I think that's another thing we try to be really rigorous about is I'll write shit. I mean, we write stuff all the time, and it's like, oh, this sounds cool. And then you watch it, and it's like, it doesn't need to be in there. Mm-hmm. And I think, if anything, I've overcut. I think there are things we've cut out of cuts that I'll find myself a year later thinking about. I'm just like, yeah, shit, we went too far, and I really wish that had been in the show.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's got to survive that level of scrutiny. Mm-hmm. Does this need to be here for the story they're in? Does it need to be here to move the story forward? Is it good enough? Mm-hmm. Or is it just one of those things where you tell a sad story? Like, it has to be better than that. And so I think everyone's pretty much got one of our point of view characters, except for Silver going to season 4, which was absolutely deliberate. And his unknowability, I think, was baked into the nature of this story in terms of what he meant to Flint. And so yeah, that was not an accident, nor was the moment in which it finally comes out.
Right, I'm sure.
Wonderful.
I guess this is something I plan to keep an eye on in season 4. I mean, I feel like there are characters, again, every single backstory I feel like has filled in motivation, like that you were like, okay, why are you fixated on this thing? Okay, now I understand why you're fixated on a thing. But I do feel like there are characters who have chosen to move past whatever their backstory was explaining, and there's characters who are kind of stuck.
Yeah.
And I think that's just an interesting dynamic in general in the show, that some characters are really good at kind of evolving and incorporating and moving forward, and there are characters who are less good at that, and there are characters like Flint who've kind of had moments of each of those ways of being. So I'm looking forward in season 4 to seeing who ends up where on that spectrum.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's also it is a very slow rolled punchline. The series of backstories you get that suggests they're all there for a reason, and that they all have something in common, which is that they don't fit. I don't think anyone ended up in that life because they were born into a good situation and stayed there. They have all had some manifestation of injustice, based around the way the system was set up, that defined them. And you sort of get it at the beginning in the sense of that they are outcasts, in a very generic sense. But that has to mean something, and I think for me it was about earning it and not telling that story until you got to one that was worthy of why is this person in the show? Why is it important to them to be in the show? And so, that happened on various timescales. It depended on just kind of when it was ripe, I guess, in terms of each character.
Mm-hmm. Well, despite all of the intrigue and warnings, we are looking forward to Silvers and how that may.
Don't look forward too much because now I'm worried nobody's gonna like it. But
you know what, John? I look forward to everything, and I look forward to everything in your show completely knowing that it won't be what I expect, and it's likely to break my heart.
Probably not. It will not be what you expect. I can guarantee that.
Wow. Oh, that's so exciting. Okay.
I know. Yeah, but that's what we said to Luke. It's like, it's not like there was any way at the end of season 2 that we would have expected where we ended up in season 3. I mean, that's just part of being a fan of the show, I think, is that you're just like, hey, I really can't anticipate where things are going. And I'm here for the ride. Again, heartbreaking ride that it'll be.
Exactly. That's June and July. I mean, I think what you're feeling is the thing that takes 2 or 3 months to figure out why is this person different at the end of this story, which I don't know is true of most seasons of TV. That's just not a bar you have to meet. Why is this a massive evolution for them? And so I mean, I think that I'm glad and gratified, I think, in some sense, that that's coming across, that these are fully encapsulated stories in which everything is upside down by the end. I think that's some indication that it's working.
I think we're proof that it's working. Well, I guess my last question about Flint and Silver, but it sounds like you've kind of answered this when you've talked a lot about process, is like we knew that Toby Stephens had said that he knew his backstory from the beginning. Luke said to us that, you had said, or you all had said to him from the beginning that the
Toby, we told him, this is a scene that's going to happen 15 episodes from now. Are you okay with it? And with Luke, we told him, I don't even know what role you're playing. So
right.
Just hang tight. We'll figure something out.
Can you tell us the story of the casting with him?
It was just that dumb. It was sort of, we liked him a lot. And there were when you're casting a series, it's always, there's a million things going on all at the same time. And it gets complicated. Sure. And we had people we liked for Silver, and we had people we sort of liked for Vane, and we just didn't know. And I didn't know. And I think weirdly, Luke, his performance in season 1 is great, and I think it's fun. It's exactly what it was supposed to be. His performance in season 2 was really eye-opening, and his performance in season 3 floored me a little. So I think part of the indecision about which way we were going to go with it, I'm sure Luke's going to listen to this, so I didn't know. I didn't know that he was going to do those things in season 2 and season 3 and be that.
Sure,
of course.
I knew he was great, and I knew we want to watch him, and I knew we wanted him to have him in the show. I just had this sense of what we wanted Silver to be, and I just didn't know. And he is, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why I think this show works, but it does not work if he's not that guy. And you still haven't seen the craziest stuff. I mean, it's like, you've seen season 3, but the stuff he does in season 4 is pretty great.
I'm so excited.
Yeah.
It was always going to be, it's Flint's show. It is a show about his tragic end. But at some point, the levels were going to start to even themselves out, and it was going to become a little bit more Silver show and a little bit more Silver show until by the end of it, it kind of is Silver show. And
which is very appropriate.
Yeah, it sort of has to be. And he's quite good in it. And,
he's really good. I know. That is my favorite thing. Like, there are a lot of favorite things I have introducing people to the show. Like, there's certain. Yeah, I've just done it a bunch of times now. So it's just like there are certain things that I really enjoy in having someone. Liz was one of my people that did this. Like, that I'm like, okay, watch this show. Okay, and I would check in at certain points and be like, how are you feeling about this? How are you feeling about that? And yeah, one of my favorite things is people being baffled by my love of Silver, and I'm like. I'm always like, just wait. This is going to just be prepared for this to be nothing like what you expect. This character.
Yeah, it was always weird. There's been a few things that I think people, I guess whoever they is, of their reaction to certain things in the show that I've been surprised by. That was one of them, that the Silver you meet on page 1 isn't what you expect. It's like, well, what the fuck did you want him to be? I mean, you need to make a show. Right. And like, if he's that guy at the beginning, then where are we going?
Oh, come on. No, it's amazing. You all took him so far from, I mean, everyone knows Long John Silver. Even though people have not read Treasure Island, they've seen Muppet Treasure Island, like Liz.
Which I have now seen.
Which John now saw.
Oh, really?
I just showed it to my kids a couple of weeks ago.
Did you enjoy it? I
did.
To know.
It's actually pretty good.
It's pretty fun,
right?
I
don't know why it's not surprised. The Muppet movie is a perfect movie as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
I'm not surprised.
Then add in Tim Curry, and what more can you want, really, right?
But that was kind of one. I mean, it is. I think the arc ended up playing itself out in a really nice way. But if you think about it, if you were asked to tell a story about someone who was cartoonishly iconic, your first instinct kind of has to be, all right, well, what's the most unexpected way to meet him? Isn't just with all of those switches turned off.
Right.
And so that was actually kind of one of the easy ones of like, you just...
It took me an episode or two to connect it to Treasure Island, because I was like, my husband convinced me to watch the show, and I started watching it, and I knew nothing, I mean, except pirates, and I was like, I'm not that into pirates. So I started watching it, and then it took me an episode or two. I was like, wait a minute, we have Flint and we have John Silver. Yeah. Wait a minute. And my husband's from Israel, so he actually didn't even... He just, like, wasn't really aware of Treasure Island. Like, so he did.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, once I said it, he's like, oh yeah, I know there's a book like that. Like, it just wasn't part of his, his personal kind of cultural osmosis that you would have even had you not read the book.
Which I think it has to be. I mean, it's not like we're making Star Wars sequels where you just assume everybody knows what they're watching. Like, you kind of have to go into this assuming that if you're relying on that book for it to work, you're in some serious trouble. So,
right.
Yeah. And full disclosure, I've never read the book. I tried to earlier this year.
I thought you read it with the book group. There was a group of our friends did a book group of Treasure Island specifically.
Yep. It's worth reading after 410.
I'm certain. That I'm looking forward to now.
I just downloaded. I have the audiobook read by Alfred Molina.
Nice.
Ooh, that's pretty fun.
I would listen to Alfred Molina read me Treasure Island for sure. Yeah.
That's going to be fun. Silver's art. It's funny. Flint is what I fell in love with. And, don't get me wrong. I adore Flint. I love Flint all the way through. Flint is my man. Like, he's my dream character on many levels. But Silver's arc for me so far, I mean, again, I'm still one season from knowing the full story, but Silver's arc for me is really just the thing that brings me back.
Yeah.
And that I love more each time I watch it. Like, and podcasting about it has made me love it a million times more because we had to really talk about it and dissect it.
Yeah, it was, it sort of snuck in there at the beginning. I mean, I think we were aware during the first season that the show is about a guy who's not really in it and is doing everything he can to get out of it.
Right.
Which is also a weird way to structure the first season of your show. But it developed, I think, at the pace and in the tone that we wanted, and I think landed in a place that feels right. Knowing that at the outset of this, the canon in the room was this is a story about the two of them, and this is how it ends, and this is how it should feel. I think season 4 is bridge that gap, I think, in a good way.
Okay, so as a kind of part of the Flint Silver thing, when did you all decide to bring Maddie in? Like, I just feel like at the end of season 3, like a huge part.
Yeah, that's actually a fun story. We knew, at least at the beginning of season 3, that we wanted to... It felt disingenuous to tell a story about this time and place without slavery being a character as an institution. And it was deliberately, I think, a little bit underplayed in season 2 because I just didn't quite know how to do it right yet. And I didn't want to do the version of it that was just slavery is bad. Because it just, you get that feeling like you're in social studies and it just doesn't feel like it lives up to the rest of the complexity of the show. And so going into season 3, we decided, all right, we're going to do this. We need to figure out the right way of doing this. We knew it was connected to Scott. We knew that turn was going to happen. We had done a lot of research about the Maroon communities, and specifically about Queen Anne, who was a historical figure and a massively important historical figure in Jamaica.
Yes, Jamaica.
Where a lot of this is sort of cribbed from. Where it got interesting, though, was we saw 2 actresses. And I wasn't sure. It was supposed to be one character. It was supposed to be that we got to this place and there was a woman running it. And it kept kind of oscillating back and forth between being Scott's daughter and Scott's wife. And we saw 2 actresses, Mashidi and Zaytu, who I kind of loved, both of them. And we hadn't really cast anyone in that demographic in the show. And you find these 2 amazing actresses who are no one's really ever seen before on US TV. And I struggled with it for a couple of weeks. Like, I can't pick. Like, I honestly, I don't know which one. And it was one of those moments where it just kind of dawned on me. It's like, well, then just don't pick. Just take them both. Yeah. And then weirdly, this is one of those moments where I think, sometimes the accidents break in your favor, I think, if you're asking the right questions. And, what happened was a story that didn't fully make sense to me because whoever it was, whether it was Scott's daughter or Scott's wife, she wasn't going to have anybody to talk to. And it was this very dry beginning of a story that was about a woman who was running a camp in which, who gives a shit? Like, you sort of like stop caring, the further you get into that sentence. The moment it became a mother and a daughter, and a story about these 2 women who were missing a part of their family, and, a daughter who grew up without a father because he was at work a lot, and a wife who needed to be king and queen simultaneously. Who was not raised for it. This woman was a slave. I mean, she was, this is not a woman who was somehow educated, in political theory. Right. I was like, oh, that's way more interesting. Like, I want to write scenes between the 2 of them. Yeah. And so I hope I would have figured that out eventually as a narrative issue, but it happened as a casting issue. I just couldn't say no to either of them. And so maybe that just made it a little bit faster, a little bit easier to figure out. But, I kind of, those are the moments where I kind of love that we were you would have never seen them. Like, you would have never seen them on TV like this. I mean, eventually, the 2, they're insanely talented and they're going to be insanely successful.
They're so wonderful. Yeah.
And so it's probably dumb to say you never would have seen them. Of course, you'll see them eventually, but I'm glad that we found them. I'm glad that we were able to sort of, be in a position to see them for the first time and think, Jesus, everybody's got to meet them. They're great.
Yeah. Well, and they're fabulous in themselves. We've talked about it a lot. We're crazy in love with both of them, and fabulous for the story on many levels because it allowed you to expand the war against civilization in a way that was very appropriate and inspirational. And also because the 2 of them are a perfect mirror for Flint and Silver, I feel like, by the end of season 3, about styles of leadership and styles of succession. And that's one of my favorite things about the season finale, actually, is the contrast between what's going on with Silver and Flint and what's going on with Maddie and her mother about, looking at succession and how that goes.
Carefully tiptoeing around giving anything away for season 4, but I think that the parallels in season 3 in those relationships, I think, were really helpful. I think Silver finding someone that he could very unexpectedly be vulnerable around, for a character who had committed to the idea that he could not allow himself to be vulnerable around anyone, was really helpful. And I think at the end of the day, while Treasure Island isn't like literal canon for us, I found the throwaway mention of Silver is married to an African woman interesting. Right. That's a choice and a choice that suggests there's more story there. And so that I think also became a little bit of a challenge that we set for ourselves and felt excited about. I was like, how do you make that, however many sentences that is in the book, it might be 3 sentences in the entire book.
It's very short, right?
How do you make that such a big deal? And how do you make that say so much more than just she's African? It's this entire I don't think I'm giving anything away. This very big romance between the two of them, and
That's already very clear in season 3.
yeah.
I love it. It's beautiful.
Yeah, we've talked about it a lot. We love it a lot.
Well, that's good. I'm glad. It's holding up a lot of story in season 4. So if you didn't care, we're in trouble.
Oh, good.
Excellent.
We're happy to hear
I'm
that.
so
I know,
excited.
Liz.
Wonderful.
You just made Liz so happy. I mean, I love it. Liz loves it.
I do. Yeah.
They were fun to write. They were fun to flesh it out and to be able to tell the story. And I think deliberately in 304 and in 305, really in season 3 in their story, she's a kid. She's she has very big eyes and she wants to do a lot, and she's
and a very big library.
a very big library, and she's brave, but she's a kid. And in a moment when her mother tells her, you know what you're talking about, you see it just for a moment. You see she could be 16 for all we know.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't think about that. That's totally true.
And that arc of watching this woman go from that to someone who can stand in a room with Toby Stephens and Luke Arnold and hold their own. I mean, I've heard our cast members who are insanely experienced and talented talk about acting opposite Toby and having panic attacks in the middle of it. And this is an actress,
or needing a beer after. That's what Luke talked about, is needing a beer afterwards.
Several of them. And Zaytu and Mashidi both are in scenes with him where they are giving as good as they get.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I can't say enough about them. I just love them both.
Yeah. No, they're phenomenal. And in addition to all of that, I mean, I just love that you all, we were so embedded in pirate ways. I mean, you all messed with us a little bit, because we would have Ned Lowe or someone who kind of would alter the status quo of what we had learned about pirates and what we had decided is pirate culture. But to then be presented with such a different type of community and a different style of leadership, and then to have Silver really learn from that, for me was huge. Like that Silver had suddenly, he had not intentionally, but had bit by bit kind of embedded himself in pirate culture. And then the minute he saw something else, he's like, oh, wait, let me learn from that as well. I just felt like that was such a great part of Silver's personality and his development, that we see him, yes, fall in love, and that's gorgeous, and be vulnerable, gorgeous. But in a world that's about power and leadership in so many ways, for him to also say, hey, there's a whole different style of that as well.
Yeah.
And for Maddie to so deliberately be teaching him about that. I mean, part in the beginning, more kind of putting him in his place. But I think by the end of season 3, it felt very deliberate that she was like, hey, learn from me. Let's learn from each other about how we do this thing.
Although I don't think you have to scratch that hard at it for it to, it's vaguely subversive. I mean, I think in those scenes, a woman who has inherited her leadership position and has absolute authority by virtue of that is telling a guy who needs to get votes in order to be able to function, you should learn how I do it because it's easier. And for a moment,
oh no, there's many layers to all of it,
and
right?
then for a moment in that story, you're totally with her, and I think that is also for me moments where I feel like the show is functioning, where you can forget that for a moment. You can forget that an extremely benevolent and lovely dictator is explaining to the
and so lovely,
the properly elected head of this very small polity that he's doing it wrong, and you believe her,
right?
That's I think that's probably
well, but I mean, granted, he learned a whole lot from Flint before that, so
that is true.
You could make a pretty good argument that he might be doing it wrong.
That is absolutely true.
No, and for us it was really fun because it was a callback to what Vane had said about Eleanor incorrectly, like the idea of power that just is. Like Maddie is that.
Yeah, but I think in a way where you understand. I mean, to me, her story, and I think season 4 also not giving that much away. I think it's strongly suggested in season 3 is taking place in tandem with Eleanor's story, and
absolutely.
That this was a story about in some respect, why is Eleanor Eleanor? Why are there things about her that you're watching someone who kind of began where she did, but didn't come from a broken home, came from a place where her mother loved her and was around to raise her. And to me, I think that was always a little bit of the character experiment of they might not be that different,
right?
But for this one thing, and then
you made that beautiful parallel where Maddie talks about them being childhood friends.
Yeah, I like the idea that they were in this strange way separated at birth, and the lives they've led and how they sort of wind their way back to each other. But then you realize how the influences on them are so different, and it's way more complicated than just one of them had a mother and the other didn't. But I think that that's probably not to be underestimated either in terms of the effect it's had. Which I think is why those scenes between the Queen and Maddie in season 3 are so important. To see that there's someone who's shaping her and who's helping her figure out how to wield that power, because it can go real bad real fast when you have that much control and you don't know what to do with it.
That she's been trained to wear the crown.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time talking about crowns.
Yes, it recurs once or twice. The theme.
Yeah, that became a really fun thing for us that we kept bringing up with people, doing well with the weight of the crown, doing less well with the weight of the crown.
Yes.
Sometimes doing better when they are relieved of the weight of a crown.
Yeah, I think
that ended up being a really fun conversation for us.
Point of view is really important in those things too. I think there's two ways to watch a lot of these stories. One is, what would I like this person to do? And I think watching that story, you end up feeling like Charles Vane is awesome, because he's doing the things I want him to do. And then I think there's another story that's a little bit harder to watch as a TV show, which is, what would I do? Or what would I hope I would do? And I think when I watch the show that way, the only person who is making any sense is Eleanor, and Max to some extent. Not in a moral way, but in a I think she and Max are kind of, Max in season 3, but Eleanor all the way through is kind of the only one who is trying to make this work and make it work in a way where everybody doesn't die. And that is a really shitty, awful burden to carry. And so I think it negates wish fulfillment almost immediately. But I think the way she was written, I think, is, if I am being honest with myself, a responsible grown-up would make this decision for the most part, which is not to say that she's flawless, but I think a lot of the stuff that I think that character has caught a lot of shit for, I think if you really sat down and thought about, all right, setting aside the need for this adventure perpetuating itself, if your goal was to stabilize things, how can you not do this? How can you not make these decisions? And I think that was another one of those ones that surprised me. It surprised me, and there's a lot of reasons why, but it surprised me a little bit that didn't come through. It's actually a thing where I start to wonder, like, shit, did I not write this the right way? But I think that was the intent. I think it's easy to like Vane because he's fun, but the world Charles Vane wants to build,
and he's pure,
is not one you can raise kids in. And, it is not a place I think you would want to live in. It's certainly not a place I would want to live in. No. And I think that's the thing we tried to be. I mean, Robert and I both are, The Wire is perfect television. And I think it is perfect television because it's able to have those kinds of conversations where you can love this character, but at a certain point I will remind you that this guy murders for a living. And that his moral code is not yours. And that it's fun and escapist to subscribe to it. But it is that. It's escapist. It's not reality. And I think to get to that next level of truth, I guess, in storytelling, I think you have to engage with that. You have to engage with the fact that Charles Vane killed a lot of people, and those people had relatives, and those people didn't give a shit that Zach's fun to watch, and that, that it's...
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the thing you try to keep alive too, to be fair, to be fair in every direction.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense. I think I would like to live in the world that Miranda would create, but she didn't get to do that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone has a version of where they are headed that sort of vaguely makes some sense. I think the tragedy of this is that the world you would want to live in is being most advanced by the people you most hate in the show. Not you, but that one most hate in the show. Those are the people living in a world in which you can have a house and send your kids to school and not worry about getting murdered on the street.
Well, except Thomas. I would have lived in Thomas's world.
That is true. But he also died real fast. So
I know.
clearly,
Well, I mean, that's what you're saying basically, is the person whose world I most would have wanted to live in was in, he was unable to actually continue to survive in the real world.
That society was unequivocal in its rejection of that attempt.
I know. Yes. I know. I like Thomas's world. I'll just hold on to Thomas forever. Well, okay, so let's get into then my other question about darkness and optimism. I do believe that your show is actually, despite what many people might think, a show of optimism. Again, haven't seen season 4, so I don't know.
Yes.
But I do still hold on to this, that, okay, with what you just said, like even the people who would not necessarily build a world that I would like to raise my daughter in, I do have this basic belief that even the people who do the worst things think that they're doing them for the right reasons.
Oh, for sure.
I believe that is just a basic optimism that you or all of you all or the whole show as a worldview has.
I think I skew away from characters who, while plausible, are a little one-dimensional and being so broken that they're just shitty. It just feels easy to me. I think, and I think there is absolutely a commitment to the idea that everyone thinks they are the good guy in this story, to the point where it's text, to the point where it's probably like in very hot pink highlighter text. No one wants to be the bad guy in this story. They're determined not to be.
Right.
They'll fuck all manner of things up to avoid it, which I think is true. I think there are clearly villains in the story, but they don't think so. And I think that, I don't know if you call it optimism or just sort of, it's just a more resonant story to me, that everyone's really struggling.
Yes. A more human story, maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it is definitely more human. Because I think that is what humans do. I think that's what we do, is that we all tell ourselves stories where we are the person who's doing the right and are the good person. I still, again, I guess we can revisit this after season 4, but I still believe that ultimately it's not just, and there are moments of characters, telling themselves a narrative where they are the hero when they're doing horrible things. There are moments like that. I still feel like the overall, I don't know what to call it. Like, it's not a message because you aren't giving a message, but the overall way that the world works in Black Sails world is that it's not just people like justifying their actions, but that it all is, that the source of it is a true goodness, not just a convincing oneself that they're good. That the intention is actually one of benevolence towards the world, and not just like I'm going to excuse my own bad behavior because I'm the hero of my own story. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, or I think the third version of I lack the capacity to understand why I'm such an asshole.
Yeah, no, your characters are all too sophisticated for that already. I didn't even address that version of it.
Which is totally real, is a thing. It's, I'm going to avoid any commentary about the state of the world right now, but those people exist.
Yes, they do.
I think for me, it may just be a kind of a product of writing process, weirdly, is I kind of can't figure a scene out until I can understand both sides of it, and I hope I'm not a sociopathic completely incapable of understanding how shitty I am. So those scenes just don't ever make sense to me. It's just they feel one-sided. So you need to, and it's just more fun. Like, I like that through 3 seasons, the only heterosexual romantic relationship with a capital R is between 2 people who should, by all rights, be the villains in this story. But they don't think they are. And yeah, they think they're doing the right thing. And I'm not sure they're not. And so I think it's okay to invest in that and to invest in the earnestness of it. That I think, to me, that relationship is face value. It's, I think, the Woods Rogers Eleanor relationship is something that, we decided at the beginning of season 3, we're going to play this straight. We haven't done it yet. Like, we're 3 seasons into a show. We haven't had a heterosexual love story yet. We should probably do one of those at some point. And so it was like, let's do it with them. Like, they make sense for each other, and they are both unusual in their native habitat and not suited for anyone else they probably would have come across in that. So the fact that we were able to keep the ball in the air for 2 seasons, before he showed up, I think was a challenge. But it was nice that we could wait that long so that Eleanor could be in a position to make that mean something.
Yeah.
Yeah, the bad guy who we adore.
It's true.
And that was where we lost our internet connection with Jon. So thank you, Jon, for coming and chatting with us. It was so much fun.
Thank you so much, Jon, for being on the show, for giving us so much of your time and showing us your creative process and giving us some insight into the work that you do. We've been so excited about this show and for season 4, and we really look forward to having you back.
We are so excited for season 4 and just as excited to talk to you about it afterwards once it's all wrapped up and we know the shape of this amazing story with its end.
Okay, well, with that being said, until next week, from Common Room Radio, I am Liz Stevens.
And I'm Daphne Olive.
Fathoms Deep is a Common Room Radio production. For more information and access to other programs, please visit us at commonroomradio.com. To show your support, pledges of as little as $1 a month can be made to patreon.com/commonroomradio. Join the conversation by using the hashtag #Fathoms Deep and follow us on Twitter at BlackSalesCast. We ask that you keep your tweets respectful and positive, and please avoid spoilers. If you have more to say, we want to hear it in all its spoiler glory. Email us at podcast@commonroomradio.com with Fathoms Deep in the subject line. Thanks for listening.